More than 1,000 people are living right now beneath the Las Vegas Strip, a few feet below the most expensive casinos on Earth, inside a network of flood tunnels that were never meant to be inhabited. That fact alone tells you something most history books skip. Civilization has always had an underground floor. We talk about cities as things that rise, that reach, that tower. But the real history of how humans settle and survive runs in the opposite direction just as often. Fear drives people down. So does war, plague, poverty, and sometimes nothing more dramatic than the shape of the land. 13 places in this list make that argument with evidence you can visit, touch, and in some cases, sleep in. The Romans built aqueducts to carry water across continents. By 1943, those same stone channels were sheltering civilians from aerial bombardment. In Edinburgh, entire streets were sealed during the Black Death, some of them with residents still inside. And those buried closes sat undisturbed for centuries until urban excavations broke them open again. In Guizhou, China, a single natural cave has functioned as a complete village, with homes, pathways, and a school for generations. In Colombia, a salt mine 9 stories deep became a cathedral with vaulted ceilings and sculpted altars. Matera in southern Italy spent millennia as a cave city that was simultaneously a slum and an architectural marvel before UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site. The pattern across all 13 locations is consistent. What begins as emergency shelter has a way of becoming permanent. Infrastructure gets added, community forms, culture takes root in the dark. The question these places force is not why people went underground. The reasons are always obvious. The question is why so many of them never came back up. For most of human history, one of Europe's oldest continuously inhabited places was considered a national disgrace. Number 13 on our list is the Sassi di Matera, a vast complex of cave dwellings carved into the limestone gorge of Matera, a city in the Basilicata region of southern Italy. And the contradiction at its core is almost too sharp to believe. People have lived here without interruption for 9,000 years. That is not a typo. From the Neolithic period straight through to the 20th century, this canyon was home to a functioning human community, predating Rome, predating the medieval period, outlasting empires. By the 1950s, roughly 15,000 people still occupied these caves. Families of 8 or 10 shared a single carved room with a donkey and chickens because the body heat of the animals was a practical survival strategy through the winter months. Malaria was chronic, child mortality was catastrophic. Italy's future Prime Minister, Alcide de Gasperi, publicly called the Sassi a national shame. In 1952, the Italian government passed a specific law forcing all residents out and relocating them to newly built housing on the edge of the city. The caves were locked. The stone city went silent for 3 decades. Then came the reversal. In 1993, UNESCO inscribed the Sassi di Matera as a World Heritage Site, citing it as an outstanding example of a Troglodyte settlement. In 2019, Matera was named European Capital of Culture. The same chambers that once housed livestock now operate as boutique hotels with swimming pools. The cave churches, still bearing 8th century frescoes, charge admission. Same stone, same walls. Once the symbol of poverty, now the marker of prestige. Matera is where our list ends, and it is probably the sharpest illustration of the central tension we have been tracing all along. A house with no outside. That is the simplest way to describe what the Berber families of Matmata, Tunisia, have been building for centuries. Number 12 on this journey sits in the southern Tunisian desert, and from a distance it looks like nothing at all. A burnt ochre plain interrupted by shallow depressions in the ground. Walk up to one of those depressions and look down, and you find yourself staring into a circular courtyard 10 meters below the surface, ringed by rooms carved directly into soft limestone. The reason the houses have no exterior is the same reason they have survived: the Sahara. Summer temperatures in Matmata regularly hit 50 degrees Celsius. Inside the Troglodyte courtyards, the temperature holds steady at 23 to 25 degrees year-round. The earth itself acts as insulation, and the open cylindrical shaft draws light and airflow downward without funneling in the desert wind. This is not primitive construction. It is engineering calibrated over generations to solve a specific and lethal problem. Around each central pit, families carve out kitchens, sleeping rooms, storerooms, and stalls for livestock. Life organizes itself around the void. The architecture has another, stranger layer of fame. In 1976, George Lucas scouted the region for a planet that would feel genuinely alien, and Matmata delivered. The home of the Skywalker family on Tatooine in Star Wars was filmed in a real troglodyte courtyard at the Hotel Sidi Driss, which still operates today and still welcomes guests who want to sleep in a hole in the ground on a fictional desert planet. The Tunisian desert became the desert of a galaxy far, far away because it already looked foreign enough by any earthly standard. The village is gradually emptying. Many residents have moved into modern housing on the slopes above. Those who remain keep the old rhythms, tending livestock and storing grain in rooms their grandparents carved. But the departure of people accelerates the erosion. Without maintenance, the pit walls collapse inward. Matmata endures, for now, fragile and irreplaceable. The next place goes even further underground, 18 floors down, built to shelter 20,000 people behind stone doors weighing several tons. A fully functioning cathedral sits 101 meters underground, and nobody planned it. That is the central fact about Wieliczka salt mine, number 11 on our list, and the one that makes everything else about it harder to dismiss as mere spectacle. The paradox runs deep. What began in 13th century Poland as an industrial operation, the extraction of salt worth more than silver in medieval economies, gradually became something no engineer had drafted and no king had commissioned. Miners working in near-total darkness, generation after generation, started shaping their world. They carved chapels, then larger chapels. Then St. Kinga's Chapel, a 12-meter-high nave where altars, bas-reliefs, chandeliers, and the floor itself are cut entirely from salt rock. They worked on it across lifetimes, and they prayed there without coming up for air. The numbers frame the scale. 7 centuries of continuous extraction, 300 kilometers of tunnels, 9 levels descending into the earth, the lowest reaching nearly 350 meters below the surface. But numbers miss what it feels like to stand inside a space where amber-colored vaults curve overhead and underground lakes mirror the light in perfect stillness. Wieliczka earned its place on the very first UNESCO World Heritage List in 1978. Salt extraction stopped in 1996, but the mine did not. It receives more than 1 million visitors a year and houses restaurants, exhibition halls, and souvenir shops, none of which were the original purpose of any chamber they occupy. The most clinically remarkable feature is a working sanatorium, operating hundreds of meters underground, where patients with asthma and chronic respiratory conditions live and undergo treatment, breathing a microclimate that no surface hospital can replicate. What Wieliczka demonstrates is that utility and beauty are not opposites. For 700 years, men came here to work. They built, incidentally, a civilization. The instinct to make a place livable, even sacred, turns out to be stronger than the darkness. Seattle buried itself on purpose. Not slowly, the way cities accumulate sediment over centuries, but deliberately, within a few years, one shovelful of hillside at a time. What lies beneath the sidewalks of the financial district today is not a ruin. It is a decision. On June 25, 1889, a pot of glue tipped over in a woodworking shop on Front Street. The fire that followed moved fast enough to erase 25 city blocks in 12 hours, taking with it nearly everything Seattle had managed to build. But the engineers who surveyed the damage understood immediately that the fire had done them an accidental favor. Seattle's real problem was not the buildings that had burned, it was the ground they had been standing on. The city sat on tidal wetlands. Sewage flowed backward when the tide came in. Streets turned to mud with every rain. The land itself was an engineering liability, and no one had ever had a compelling enough reason to fix it. Now they did. The plan was straightforward and massive in scale. Bury the old street level under 1 to 9 meters of fill, depending on the neighborhood, and build the new Seattle on top of it. Construction started immediately, before the ashes had fully cooled. Shop owners who refused to wait rebuilt their ground floors at the old elevation, not realizing the streets rising around them would eventually leave those floors underground. Entrances, storefronts, sidewalk arcades, all of it sank below the new city surface. The gap between the old facades and the new street vaults became a damp, brick-lined underworld. People still walked those corridors for years afterward, until city authorities sealed the last hatches in the early 1900s. The underground did not stay quiet. Opium dens, illegal gambling halls, and Prohibition-era bars found a home in the passages the city had officially forgotten. Police rarely made the trip down. Above ground, no one asked questions. Today, guided tours have been threading through those same brick corridors since 1965. Rusted counters, intact storefronts, the original sidewalk grade preserved under a living city. Seattle Underground ranks as number 10 on our list, and as proof that an engineering problem, a catastrophic fire, and a few decades of willful ignorance can, given enough time, become a tourist destination. The site that follows was built on an entirely different logic. Not fire, not flood, not municipal ambition, but 7 centuries of salt. A city built entirely around the assumption that it would one day be found by enemies. That is the design philosophy of Ouyi, the ancient underground city beneath Nushabad in Iran's Isfahan province, and every corridor, trap, and hidden entrance reflects it with disturbing clarity. The site wasn't discovered until 2006, when utility workers accidentally broke through a concealed entrance during routine construction. What archaeologists found behind it rewrote their understanding of medieval Iranian engineering. Ouyi descends 3 levels into the earth, with tunnels carved to full human height, running for what Iranian researchers estimate to be several kilometers in total length. The complex dates back roughly 1,000 years, though certain sections may be older. It was likely built well before the Mongol invasions, but it was the approaching armies of the 13th century that elevated these passages from shelter into fortress. Entire communities vanished underground for weeks at a time, while their villages burned above them. The logic of the place is ruthlessly rational. Entrances are hidden within ordinary surface structures and sized so that a person must crouch and enter one at a time. No formation, no rush, no charge. Corridors narrow to a single body's width, stripping any attacking force of its numerical superiority the moment it enters. Pit traps are set into the floor. Branching passages are deliberately labyrinthine, designed so that an unfamiliar intruder cannot navigate them without a guide. Meanwhile, the residents had ventilation shafts drawing fresh air from the surface and wells supplying water, the means to outlast any siege. Ranked 9th among history's most sophisticated underground settlements, Ouyi represents something rarer than a hiding place. It is a weaponized landscape, a passive defense system where the architecture itself fights back. The threat was never supposed to reach the people inside. And if the next entry on this list is any indication, some civilizations took that principle and scaled it into something that could shelter not a village, but an entire army. A city of 20,000 people once vanished completely, and nobody above ground had any idea it existed. Not a ruin, not a myth, an actual functioning underground metropolis, sealed behind stone doors that could only be opened from the inside. Derinkuyu, carved beneath the volcanic plains of Cappadocia in central Turkey, descends 18 levels to a depth of 85 meters, making it the deepest known subterranean city on Earth. Ranked 8th on our list, it represents something qualitatively different from any other underground structure in history. The reason it was built explains the engineering. During the early centuries of Christianity, communities in this region faced Roman persecution. Later, between the 7th and 10th centuries, Arab raids swept repeatedly across Anatolia. When the threat arrived, entire populations disappeared, not metaphorically, but literally. They drove their livestock underground, sealed the tunnel entrances with circular stone wheels weighing up to 500 kilograms, and waited. Those wheels could be rolled into position from inside, bracing across the passage. From the exterior, there was no mechanism to shift them. The people inside controlled the only lock. What they built to survive long-term confinement was not a shelter, but a self-sufficient settlement. Wine and oil presses, food storage chambers, schools, churches, independent water sources fed by separate underground veins, and more than 52 ventilation shafts that pushed breathable air down to the lowest halls. The soft volcanic tuff of Cappadocia made the excavation possible. The same material provided natural insulation and structural stability. Derinkuyu was discovered by accident in 1963 when a local resident renovating his home broke through a wall and found an ancient tunnel behind it. Since then, archaeologists have mapped roughly half of the estimated total area. The rest remains unexcavated. A city built from fear, hidden for centuries, and still not fully known. Naples is slowly eating itself from below, and has been for over 2,000 years. Beneath the city's historic centre, roughly 40 meters underground, lies one of Europe's most layered subterranean systems, and the ground above it collapses without warning. Streets vanish, buildings tilt, the city keeps building upward while the void underneath keeps growing. This is Napoli Sotterranea, ranked 7th on our list, and understanding why it ranks there means understanding how Naples was built in the first place. In the 4th century BCE, Greek colonists quarried the soft volcanic tuff beneath their settlement to construct the city above. Every block they cut left a hollow below. The Romans inherited those hollows and engineered them into a water supply network, channels, cisterns and shafts that served the population of Neapolis for centuries, branching further under streets that had no idea what lay beneath them. The logic continued across millennia. During World War II, when Allied bombers appeared over Naples, thousands of residents climbed down through narrow gaps between buildings and moved into the ancient chambers. For weeks and months at a time, they slept there, cooked there, gave birth there. Entire lives conducted by kerosene lamplight in carved stone rooms 40 meters below the city. The handwriting they scratched into walls, the candle burns, the personal belongings left behind, all of it is still there. After the war, the tunnels became a dumping ground. For decades, Neapolitans used the underground cavities to dispose of things too large or too inconvenient to handle otherwise. Motorcycles, cars, furniture, household appliances dropped through street-level openings with no record kept. That informal landfill has since calcified into an accidental museum. Dozens of vehicles from the 1950s and 60s stand in complete darkness, coated in dust, positioned exactly as they fell. Guided tours now move through sections of the network, but specialists estimate more than 700 kilometers of passages remain beneath the city. most of them unexplored. The subsidence is not metaphorical. Naples is not standing on solid ground. It is standing on its own accumulated past, and occasionally that past gives way. Edinburgh has a neighbourhood that was never destroyed. It was never cleared, never excavated, never rediscovered in any dramatic sense. It was simply built over, and it stayed exactly as it was, sealed inside the body of the city for 3 centuries. Mary King's Close ranks 6th among the most genuinely unsettling places on Earth, and the reason it unsettles has nothing to do with theatre. The paradox is architectural. What looks like underground Edinburgh was never underground at all. In the 16th century, the buildings along the Royal Mile stacked themselves down the steep volcanic ridge, floor above floor, so that each level functioned as a separate street. The lowest floors had shops, hearths, and entire families crammed into 2 or 3 rooms. They were not basements, they were neighbourhoods that happened to be at the bottom. In 1645, bubonic plague reached the city. Historians continue to debate the specifics, but the version that persists, and that cannot be conclusively refuted, holds that city authorities chose containment over evacuation. The entrances to the close were sealed. Those inside were left to die in isolation. The houses became a mass grave, and then, when the Royal Exchange was built directly over them in the 18th century, they became a foundation, not buried under earth, buried under city. What the darkness preserved is precise and strange. Walls still bearing their original plaster, hearths intact, scraps of fabric, handprints. The cold and the sealed air did the work that museums usually fake. Guided tours run here now, with candles and commentary, but the compression of the space, the low ceilings, the absolute stillness, none of that was installed for effect. One small room draws particular attention. A Japanese psychic visiting in the 1990s said she felt the presence of a child there, a girl named Annie. Tourists began leaving toys. The pile has been growing ever since. Stuffed animals, dolls, small figures pressed into the corner. No official body removes them. This is not a memorial anyone designed. It is what happens when people encounter something they cannot process and need to respond to anyway. The city built its future on top of its past and forgot to look down. Mary King's Close is what was there when someone finally did. Beneath one of Beijing's busiest shopping districts, there is a roller skating rink, there are mushroom farms, there is a cinema. And there are roughly 30 kilometers of hand-dug tunnels built by ordinary citizens following a direct order from Mao Zedong. Number 5 on our list, Dixiacheng, the Beijing underground city. The reason this vast network exists comes down to a single month, March 1969. A border clash on Zhenbao Island between Chinese and Soviet forces convinced China's leadership that a Soviet nuclear strike was not a distant hypothetical, but an approaching reality. Mao's response was sweeping and immediate. Every family, every factory, every school was ordered to dig. No heavy machinery was deployed. With shovels and pickaxes, hundreds of thousands of Beijing residents excavated the earth beneath their own streets, carving out a shelter system designed to protect 40% of the city's population. What they built went far beyond a network of bare concrete corridors. The tunnels were equipped with hospitals, schools, food warehouses, and freshwater wells. Everything required for an autonomous existence sealed off from whatever might be happening above ground. The roller rink and the cinema were not afterthoughts. They reflected a deliberate philosophy. Survival could not mean merely staying alive. It had to mean continuing to live. Concealment was engineered into every detail. Entrances were reportedly hidden beneath shop counters and classroom desks, positioned so that an entire urban population could vanish underground within seconds of an alarm without triggering panic in the streets above. The system was never used for its intended purpose. Sino-Soviet tensions eventually eased, the Cold War receded, and the tunnels remained sealed and largely forgotten for decades. Parts of Dixiacheng are now open to visitors. Other sections are leased as storage space or small shops. That transformation, monument to atomic age fear, quietly converted into a tourist attraction, gives this place its particular gravity. The Beijing Underground City was a state-directed project built to shield millions. The site coming next on our list could not be more different. A place where people went underground not to escape an enemy, but to escape the city pressing down on them from above. Number 4 on our list sits beneath one of the most aggressively lit places on Earth. Las Vegas generates enough artificial light to be visible from orbit. The Strip never dims. The casinos operate on the assumption that time itself is optional. No clocks, no windows, no reason to leave. The whole city is engineered around the proposition that fortune is always one pull away. Directly underneath it, about 20 feet down, people are sleeping on mattresses. The storm drain network beneath Las Vegas stretches roughly 600 kilometers through the Mojave Desert. It was built for a single purpose: to handle the flash floods that periodically tear through the valley with almost no warning. In the Mojave, rain doesn't accumulate gradually, it arrives all at once, and when it does, a dry concrete tunnel can become a surging channel in minutes. The system works exactly as designed. The problem is what happens in between the floods. In the dry stretches, which is most of the year, those tunnels are inhabitable, and for somewhere between 500 and over 1,000 people at any given time, depending on the period and who's counting, they became home. Not shelter in the provisional sense. Home in the fullest sense: furniture, bookshelves, rugs on the concrete, photographs on the walls. Some residents have stayed for years. Journalists and outreach workers came to call them the tunnel people or the mole people. Most arrived underground the same way: gambling debt, job loss, untreated mental illness, the slow financial unraveling that Las Vegas specializes in producing alongside its jackpots. The city sells the fantasy of transformation. The tunnels hold the people for whom that transformation ran the other direction. The real danger underground isn't the dark or the rats. It's a rainstorm 30 kilometers away in the mountains. Everything accumulated: medication, identification documents, years of assembled living, can be gone inside of a minute. Deaths have been recorded. City authorities have cleared the tunnels repeatedly. Social services have offered relocation. Some people take it, others come back. The logic of the underground has its own coherence: invisible, ungovernable, quietly permanent. That invisibility, though, was accidental. What comes next was built deliberately, by a government, at scale, beneath the capital of the most populous country on Earth. Beneath one of the most modern skylines on Earth, roughly 1 million people were living without daylight. Not in an emergency, not temporarily, as a permanent condition of urban life in Beijing. That is the reality documented by Chinese sociologists who gave these residents a name that left little room for euphemism: Shuzhou, the rat tribe. This is entry number 3 in our look at the world's most extreme urban living conditions, and it begins not with poverty in the abstract, but with a very specific piece of Cold War infrastructure. In the late 1960s, Mao Zedong ordered the excavation of a vast network of concrete bomb shelters beneath Beijing, built to protect the population from a Soviet nuclear strike that never came. For decades, the tunnels sat largely unused. Then the economics of one of the world's most expensive cities caught up with them. As Beijing's service economy expanded, it drew millions of rural migrants who filled the lowest wage jobs the city depended on. But surface-level rent was simply out of reach. The underground rooms, measuring roughly 2 by 2 meters, with no windows, no ventilation, a single overhead bulb, and shared toilets down narrow corridors, became the only viable option. Hundreds of yuan per month, and that was considered affordable. The dangers were not theoretical. Fires in these spaces move fast. Synthetic materials, blocked exits, corridors designed for evacuation during a bombing raid, not for daily residential traffic. Researchers documented the psychological toll of prolonged darkness and severe overcrowding. Chinese authorities periodically responded with mass evictions, with particularly aggressive campaigns in 2010 and 2017 that put thousands onto the streets in the middle of winter. The shelters filled again each time. Economic pressure does not respond to enforcement unless the underlying cost of living changes, and in Beijing, it did not. What the Shizhi phenomenon reveals is a structural contradiction at the heart of rapid urbanization. The same growth that produces gleaming towers also produces the conditions that drive people underground. The skyline is real, so is what is underneath it. The most climate-efficient homes in Iran were built 7 centuries ago by people who had no concept of passive architecture. That is the central paradox of Kandavan, a village of roughly 1,000 residents carved into the volcanic cones rising from the slopes of Mount Sahand, an extinct volcano in the country's northwest. These are not ruins, they are occupied. Right now, behind those tapered spires of dark rock, people are cooking dinner, watching television, and sleeping under Persian rugs laid over floors of raw tuff. The reason Kandavan works as a thermal system comes down to one number: 2 meters. That is the approximate thickness of the walls surrounding each cone dwelling. Tuff, the volcanic material left by ancient Sahand eruptions, is soft enough to excavate with basic tools, but dense enough, when left in bulk, to absorb heat during the day and release it slowly at night. The result is a nearly constant interior temperature across seasons. Summers that push temperatures high outside leave the interiors cool. Winters that blanket the cones in snow leave the interiors warm. No boiler, no air conditioning unit, no insulation layer added afterward. The physics were always there in the rock. What the original inhabitants understood, under pressure and without theory, was that the mountain itself could be the building. Kandavan has been continuously inhabited for over 700 years, placing it among the oldest still occupied rock settlements on Earth, ranked second among the most remarkable. The village today carries all the marks of ordinary Iranian rural life. Satellite dishes, refrigerators, running water reaching rooms that were chiseled out of the hillside long before the concept of plumbing existed. A hotel has been cut into the cliff. Tourist steps climb directly up the rocky facades. None of this is performance. The residents are not curators of their own homes. The vulnerability is geological. Tuff erodes, and the question of how long the cones will hold their shape under weather and foot traffic is genuinely open. What Kandavan has already proven across 7 centuries of uninterrupted use is harder to argue with than any architectural theory. Ahead, we go underground entirely, beneath the plains of Cappadocia, where 18 floors of carved city descend into the dark. About 100 people live inside a mountain, not near it, not carved into its walls, inside it, under a natural stone ceiling that has never had a name on any blueprint. Zhendong, in China's Guizhou province, is the only fully documented human settlement located entirely within a single natural cave. That distinction sounds like a footnote. It is not. The cave sits at roughly 1,800 meters above sea level in the folded terrain of southwestern China. At some point in geological time, water found a weakness in the limestone and kept working at it until it had hollowed out a space approximately the size of 4 football pitches. The Miao people, one of China's oldest ethnic groups, found it and stayed. What stands inside today is not a symbolic occupation or a heritage exhibit. It is wooden houses on a stone floor, vegetable plots, livestock pens, a water source, and a basketball court whose backboard has a ceiling no arena designer would dare specify. The logic of remaining seems strange from the outside. The Chinese government has offered residents regulated housing with modern utilities on multiple occasions. Some accepted. The ones who didn't offer explanations that are partly practical and partly something harder to quantify. The cave maintains a stable microclimate. In winter, the rock mass absorbs the wind and holds warmth. In summer, the temperature stays lower than on the exposed slopes outside. Electricity arrived a few decades ago and made the winters easier still. But the deeper answer, given by those who refuse to leave, is about place as identity. Parents were born here. Ancestors are buried in the ground beneath the stone floor. The Miao community in Zhendong does not live in a cave because they have no alternative. They live here because this specific cave is where they are from. Relocating would dissolve something that a new apartment, however comfortable, cannot replace. No underground city, no rock-cut monastery, no tourist grotto competes with this on the same terms. Zhendong is a working village, and it happens to be inside a mountain. That is why it opens our list at number 1. The places that follow will grow more complex. In history, in geology, in the questions they raise about how humans choose where to live. Next, Iranian mountains, 7 centuries of continuous habitation and houses that emerged from the throat of a volcano. A single stone door, so heavy it could only be rolled shut from within, once sealed 20,000 people safely underground. That door belongs to Derinkuyu in Cappadocia, and it explains something strange about our species. When the surface turns hostile, we don't just hide, we build entire civilizations beneath our feet. Across 13 sites, the earth stopped being the ground we walk on and became roof, wall, shelter, and sometimes prison. Fear did most of the digging. In Iran's Nushabad, narrow passages and hidden traps waited for Mongol raiders. Beneath Naples, ancient aqueducts were repurposed into air raid shelters, and in Edinburgh's sealed Mary King's Close, plague seemed to wall the living in with the dead. Poverty and power carved the rest. Beijing's Dixie Cheng was ordered by Mao in dread of a nuclear strike. In the storm tunnels under Las Vegas, the so-called mole people furnish real homes, aware that a sudden flood can erase everything in minutes. Above them, in Beijing again, 1 million members of the rat tribe endure windowless concrete cells beneath gleaming skyscrapers. Yet not every descent is born of despair. Italy's Matera turned cave poverty into luxury boutique hotels. Tunisia's Matmata, its sandy courtyards famous from Star Wars, still shelters families. Poland's Wieliczka salt cathedral glows with crystal chandeliers, while under Seattle, the shopfronts of a fire-buried city sleep beneath passing feet. And at the summit stands dignity rather than fear. Kandavan's volcanic cones with 2-meter walls threaded by internet and plumbing. And Zhongdong in Guizhou, the only settlement on Earth entirely inside a cave, where the Miao people refuse to leave and a bouncing basketball echoes under the rock ceiling. What binds these 13 worlds together? People go underground fleeing war, need, or terror, yet even there they keep living, loving, and making a home. If this journey downward gripped you, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, in which of these underground cities would you dare to spend even one night?